Chief Apache adopts black baby he found on the road. Years later, he received a shocking surprise. The dark came slow in the mountains. It always lifted slow too. Elias Crow opened his eyes before the sun found the window. He did this every morning. His body knew the hour without a clock. The room was cold and gray, and the fire in the small stove had burned down to gray ash sometime in the night. He lay there a moment, just a moment, long enough to hear the quiet. That was the hardest part, the quiet. A ranch this far out had a hush to it that pressed on a man's chest. No small feet running down the hall. No woman humming while she stirred the morning pot. Just whined against the log walls and the far-off cry of a hawk waking up hungry. Elias sat up and pulled on his boots. His hands were steady. His face was still. He had learned long ago that a face could hold a whole storm inside and never show a drop of rain. He stepped outside. The air bit at his skin. Spring came late this high up, and it came shy, like it wasn't sure it was welcome. Patches of old snow still clung in the shadows near the barn, but the grass was greening at the edges, and somewhere a bird had decided to sing. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Elias breathed the cold in deep. He looked out at the land he had built with his own 2 hands. 15 years he had lived out here alone. Some folks in town called him the Apache who'd lost his fire. Others just crossed the street when they saw him coming. He didn't mind. He'd stopped needing people a long time ago. People got taken. People left holes. He fed the horses first. Big Red pressed his soft nose into Elias's shoulder, and Elias let his hand rest on the animal's warm neck for a breath longer than needed. Horses didn't ask questions. Horses didn't die in ways that broke you. That wasn't true, of course. Everything died, but a horse never made you promise it wouldn't. He pumped water. He hauled feed. He checked the fence line near the east pasture where 2 cows had gotten loose the week before. He worked the way he always worked, moving from one task to the next without pause, letting his hands stay busy so his mind couldn't wander to places it didn't need to go. But it wandered anyway. It always did. Clara's face came to him while he mended a strap of leather. The way she used to laugh with her whole body. The way she tucked wildflowers behind her ear even when they were dying. And Thomas. Little Thomas, chasing chickens across the yard, his short legs pumping, his laugh sharp and bright as a bell. Gone. Both of them. Years now. Taken in one terrible night that Elias still saw when he closed his eyes. He set the leather down. He pressed his palms flat against the workbench and breathed until the tightness in his throat loosened. Enough, he said out loud. His voice was rough from little use. Enough. The day passed the way all his days passed, long, slow, full of work and empty of everything else. By evening, the light had gone thin and golden. Elias took his tools out to the far fence, the one along the trail that led down toward the settlement. A few posts had gone soft with rot, and the wire had come loose. He worked alone, driving nails, tugging wire tight, his shirt sticking to his back despite the chill. He stopped to wipe his brow, and that was when he saw them. Clouds, dark ones. They had gathered over the western peaks while he wasn't looking, piling up thick and black, swallowing the last of the sun. They rolled toward him slow but sure, heavy with something waiting to fall. A low sound moved through the air, thunder far off like a great animal turning in its sleep. Elias straightened and studied the sky the way he'd studied 100 skies before. Rain coming, and hard. He should get the horses in. He should close up the barn. He didn't move right away. He just stood there, one hand resting on the fence post, watching the storm crawl down out of the mountains toward his lonely stretch of the world. The storm had raged half the night. Elias had heard it through the log walls, wild and mean, rain slapping the roof like 1,000 angry hands, wind that screamed around the corners of the house. Somewhere near dawn, it had worn itself out and slunk back into the mountains. Now the morning came clean and quiet, the way it always did after a hard rain. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. Puddles caught the pale light and held it like broken glass. Everything dripped. Elias walked out to the barn with his coffee still steaming in his hand. That was when he saw the gate. It hung open, one hinge torn loose, swinging slow in the last of the wind. The rail beside it had cracked clean through. A tree limb lay in the mud nearby, thick as a man's arm. He didn't need to think hard about what had happened. The storm had thrown the branch. The branch had broken the rail, and the cattle, spooked half out of their minds by the thunder, had pushed through the gap and scattered into the dark. He set his cup down on the fence post. He didn't curse. Cursing never brought a cow back. He saddled Big Red instead. The horse stamped and blew, still jumpy from the night, but he settled under Elias's steady hand. Elias swung up into the saddle, pulled his hat low, and rode out to find what the storm had taken. The trail was a mess. Mud sucked at Big Red's hooves with every step, and the going was slow. Elias followed the tracks, easy enough to read in the soft ground. Deep prints, spread wide, the marks of frightened animals running with no thought of where. They led down the mountain, along the winding trail that dropped toward the settlement far below. He found 2 of the cows within the first mile, standing dumb and shivering in a stand of aspen. He turned them back toward home with a low word and a slap on the flank. But the tracks told him more had gone this way. He kept riding. The sun climbed. Steam rose off the wet land in thin white ribbons. Somewhere a jay scolded him from a branch. Elias's eyes moved always, reading the trail, reading the trees, reading the world the way he'd been taught before he could walk. A bent blade of grass, a snapped twig. The land talked to those who knew how to listen. Then the land stopped talking about cattle and started talking about something else. He saw the ruts first. Wagon wheels, cut deep and crooked, veering off the trail toward the trees. Not the mark of a wagon traveling. The mark of a wagon fleeing. Or being chased. Elias slowed Big Red to a walk. His whole body went still and alert, the old warrior waking under the tired rancher's skin. He rounded a bend in the trail, and there it was. The wagon lay on its side, one wheel spinning slow in the breeze, the canvas top shredded and hanging like torn skin. Trunks and baskets were flung across the mud. A dress, a shattered lantern, a child's wooden toy, half sunk in a puddle. The horses were gone. Cut free or run off, he couldn't tell. Elias slid down from the saddle. His boots sank in the mud. He moved careful, slow, his hand resting near his hip out of old habit. Then he heard it. A sound, thin, weak, almost lost under the drip of water and the sigh of the wind. He stopped. He held his breath. It came again, a cry, small and broken and human. Elias moved fast now. He crossed to the wagon and dropped to his knees in the muck. There, tucked deep beneath the tilted bed of the wagon, wrapped in a blanket gone dark with rain, was a bundle. And the bundle moved. He reached in with both hands and drew it out gentle as he could. A baby. A tiny girl, her skin dark and cold as riverstone, her little face pinched and shaking. Her eyes were open, huge and wet, and they found his and held on. Elias's heart stopped and started again. He looked around, sharp now, searching. "Hello," he called. "Anyone? Can you hear me?" Nothing answered but the wind. He rose with the child pressed to his chest and stepped through the wreckage. And what he saw stole the breath from him. Deep gouges in the mud where boots had dug in and slid. A dark stain on a broken plank that the rain hadn't washed clean. Signs of a fight. A hard one. Someone had struggled here, fought with everything they had and lost. But there was no body, no mother, no father, only the ruined wagon and the freezing child in his arms. Whoever had been here was gone, and they had left this baby behind. The baby whimpered against his chest, and Elias pulled the wet blanket tighter around her. Her crying had gone quiet now, worn down to small hitching breaths. That worried him more than the screaming had. A baby too tired to cry was a baby running out of time. He needed to move, but first he needed to know. Elias knelt again in the mud, holding the child in the crook of one arm, and looked hard at the ground. The trail told its story to anyone who cared to read it. Here, the wagon had come off the road too fast, wheels cutting deep. Here it had tipped, and here, all around, the earth was torn up with the marks of a fight. He saw where boots had slid and struggled. He saw where something heavy had been dragged. The dark stain on the broken plank was blood. He knew blood when he saw it, and there was too much of it for anyone to walk away whole. Whoever had traveled in this wagon had not left by choice. He moved through the wreckage slow, his eyes catching what a lesser man would miss. A woman's dress, fine cloth, the kind bought in a city and not sewn on the frontier. A pair of small shoes, buttoned and polished, made for a lady's feet. Trunks broken open and their contents flung wide, but he saw no money, no jewelry, nothing of worth left behind. Whoever had done this had taken what they wanted and left the rest to rot in the rain. That told him something. This was no accident, no robbery gone bad by chance. Somebody had hunted these people down. The baby stirred and made a thin sound. Elias hushed her gentle, rocking a little without thinking, the way his body remembered even when his heart had tried to forget. Then he saw it, half buried under a spilled basket. Near where a woman's hand might have reached in her last moments lay a leather pouch. It was small, dark, worn soft with handling. A cord bound it shut, and pressed into the flap was a seal. Wax, stamped with some kind of emblem he did not recognize. A crest, maybe. The mark of a family that mattered somewhere. Elias picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. He turned it in his fingers, and something inside him went still and careful. A pouch like this, sealed like this, hidden where a mother's arm could shield it. This was no ordinary thing. Someone had wanted it kept safe, kept secret. He loosened the cord with his thumb and slid the flap open. Inside was a folded paper, its edges soft, the ink bleeding just a little where the damp had reached it. A letter. He unfolded it part way. Words. Rows of neat handwriting. A woman's hand, careful even in fear. He caught the first line before the sound reached him. Hooves. Many of them. Elias's head came up sharp. He went dead still, the way a deer goes still, every sense straining. The sound rolled up the trail from below, faint but growing. Riders. Coming fast. Coming this way. He did not know who they were, but he knew the shape of trouble when it came riding, and he knew that men who did what had been done here did not always ride far before they came back to be sure of their work. He looked down at the child in his arms. Her eyes had found his again, huge and dark and trusting in a way that reached into his chest and squeezed. She did not know what danger was. She only knew she was cold and hungry, and that a pair of strong arms held her. The letter could wait. The truth could wait. Right now there was only this small life, and it was slipping away with every minute in the cold. Elias made his choice in the space of a breath. He folded the letter, slid it back into the pouch, and tucked the pouch deep inside his coat. Then he rose. The baby held tight against him and went to Big Red. The horse tossed his head, catching the fear in the air. Easy, Elias murmured. Easy now. He swung up into the saddle, cradling the child with one arm, and turned Big Red hard toward the mountain, toward home. Then he rode, fast and quiet, away from the wreck and the coming riders, carrying the only thing that mattered close against his heart. The rain had softened by the time Elias reached the ranch. The clouds broke just enough to let a pale line of morning through. His barn stood dark against the graying sky, and the low light in the bunkhouse window told him the men were already stirring. Big Red slowed near the corral gate. Elias came down from the saddle careful, one arm still wrapped around the child. She had gone quiet again, but her small chest still rose and fell. Still fighting. Still here. Samuel Hayes came out of the barn wiping his hands on a rag. He stopped mid-step. "Elias," he said slow, "you find the cattle?" Elias walked past him toward the house. "No." Samuel's eyes dropped to the bundle in his arms. The rag fell from his fingers. "That a baby?" "It is." "Where in the Lord's name did you get a baby?" "Off the road," Elias said. "Wagon torn up on the low trail. Nobody left alive I could find. Somebody hunted them." Samuel followed him toward the porch, his boots quick in the mud. He leaned in and looked, and what he saw made his brow pull tight. The baby's skin was dark against the wet blanket. A black child. Out here, in this hard country, where folks drew their lines sharp and mean. "Elias." Samuel lowered his voice. "You know what the town's gonna say." "I know what the town says about most everything." Elias pushed open the door with his shoulder. "Get the stove going, and warm some milk. Goat milk if we got it. Small child can take it easier." Samuel stood a moment, torn between worry and the plain habit of doing what Elias asked. Then he moved. By mid-morning, word had traveled the way bad news always does on the frontier, faster than any horse, fueled by nothing but wagging tongues. They came in twos and threes, standing at the edge of Elias's property with their arms crossed and their faces hard. Mrs. Dunmore from the dry goods store, Old Peck who ran the livery, a handful of others whose names Elias knew and whose kindness he had never once seen. He came out onto the porch with the baby fed now and sleeping against him. He did not sit. He stood tall the way he had learned to stand long ago when standing meant living. "You can't mean to keep it," Mrs. Dunmore called out. "A child like that. It ain't yours? It ain't even your kind." "That baby's got people somewhere," said Peck. "Ain't your trouble, Crow. Send it on to the fort. Let them deal with it." "The fort will let her die," Elias said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "Or worse. An Apache raising a black child." Mrs. Dunmore shook her head like the words tasted foul. "It ain't natural. What'll folks think?" "I have stopped wondering what folks think," Elias said. "It never once fed a hungry child." A murmur went through them. Somebody laughed, ugly and low. Elias let his eyes move across every face, slow, unhurried, until the laughing stopped. "You want to talk about what's natural," he said. "I'll tell you what I found last night. A wagon run down. A woman dead, best I can tell, and her people with her. And this child left behind in the cold with the rain coming down and nobody to hold her. That is what men did. Men who called themselves natural, I expect. Men who slept fine after." Nobody spoke. "You ask why I'd take her." Elias looked down at the small face against his chest, then back up. "Because somebody has to. Because a child doesn't belong to the people who left her behind. She belongs to whoever refuses to leave her too." He shifted the baby higher, gentle, and touched a rough finger to her cheek. Outside the porch railing, in the wet ground along the fence, the wild roses grew. They always came back, no matter how hard the frost, no matter how poor the soil. They pushed up thorny and stubborn and bloomed anyway. "Her name is Rose," Elias said. He said it plain. He said it like a thing already done and past all arguing. "She has a home. She has it here. And no man standing on my land is going to tell me what her life is worth." The first week was the hardest thing Elias had done in years. Not the storms, not the long nights on the trail, not the fighting he had put behind him. Those things he understood. A man could plan for them, but a newborn child did not follow any plan. She woke when she pleased. She cried for reasons Elias could not name. She needed feeding and changing and holding, and she needed it all again an hour later. Samuel helped where he could. He rigged up a wooden cradle from an old crate and lined it soft with wool. He rode into the next county over to buy a nanny goat when the milk ran short, but the nights belonged to Elias alone. He would sit in the dark with Rose against his shoulder, walking the length of the front room and back. His feet knew the boards by heart now, each creak, each dip. And in that quiet, the memories came whether he asked for them or not. Thomas had cried like this once, small and red-faced and furious at the whole world. Elias remembered pacing this same floor with his son tucked in the crook of his arm. He remembered Clara laughing at him from the bed, her hair loose, telling him he looked scared of a thing that weighed less than a sack of flour. He had been scared. He was scared now, too. But he had lost the habit of it, the habit of holding something so small and so alive. He had buried that part of himself deep in the same cold ground where he had buried them. And here was this child, pulling it back up into the light, whether he was ready or not. "You don't know me," he murmured one night, looking down at her. "And I don't much know how to do this anymore." Rose blinked up at him. Her tiny hand had worked free of the blanket. It waved in the air, searching, until it caught his finger and held on. Her grip was strong, stronger than he expected from something so small. Something in his chest pulled loose. The days built one on another after that. Slow but building. He learned to warm the milk to just the right heat by testing it against his wrist. He learned the difference between the cry that meant hungry and the cry that meant tired and the cry that meant nothing at all except that she wanted to be held. He learned to move quiet through his own house so as not to wake her, and then found himself missing the sound when she slept too long. Samuel watched all of it and said little. But one evening, hauling water to the porch, he stopped and looked at Elias rocking the cradle with the toe of his boot. "Ain't seen you look like that in a long while," Samuel said. "Look like what?" "Like a man with something to get up for." Elias did not answer, but he did not argue either. Then came the night that broke him open. Rose would not settle. She had cried since sundown, and now the moon hung high and cold, and still she cried. Elias had fed her, changed her, walked her until his legs ached and his back went stiff. Nothing helped. Her little face was crumpled and red, and her wails filled the empty house until the walls seemed to shake with them. "Easy now," he whispered. "Easy, little one. I got you." But she cried on. He did not know what made him do it. Maybe he was too tired to think. The words rose up from someplace deep, from a time before all the losing. An old Apache lullaby, the one his own mother had sung to him. The one he had sung once, over another cradle, in another life. His voice was rough and low and out of practice. It cracked on the first notes, but he kept on, the old words falling soft into the dark, rising and falling, like wind moving over the hills. And slowly, Rose grew quiet. Her cries faded to small hitching breaths. Her eyes, heavy now, fought to stay open, then lost the fight. Her whole body went loose against him, warm and trusting, and finally still. Elias stood in the middle of his silent house, holding her. The house that had been so cold for so long, so empty. He had lived in it like a ghost lives in a ruin, moving through the rooms, but never truly there. Now there was breath in it again, small and steady, a little heart beating against his own. He looked down at her sleeping face in the moonlight, and he felt the warmth of her spread through his tired arms and into the hollow place he had carried for years. "There now," he whispered, and his voice trembled. There now, you're home. Running Elk came on a gray afternoon, riding slow up the long road to the ranch. Elias saw him from the porch and knew that easy seat in the saddle before he could make out the man's face. He had ridden beside that shape through more country than most men saw in a lifetime. Elias raised a hand. Running Elk raised one back. The old chief was leaner now, his hair gone the color of ash at the temples, but his eyes had lost none of their steadiness. He climbed down from his horse and stood a moment, looking at Elias the way a man looks at ground. He has not walked in a long while. You are thinner, Running Elk said. You are older, Elias answered. The ghost of a smile crossed the old man's face. That is the price of not dying. They clasped arms. Then Running Elk's gaze moved past Elias to the cradle sitting just inside the open door, and his face changed. He grew quiet, watchful. So it is true, he said. The word travels far. They say Elias Crow has taken in a child, a black child, left beside the road. They say a great many things. Is this one true? Elias stepped aside and let him look. Rose lay sleeping in the crate cradle, one small fist curled beside her cheek, her chest rising and falling in the slow rhythm of deep sleep. Running Elk leaned over her without touching. He studied her a long time. She is small, he said at last. She was smaller. Running Elk straightened. He walked to the porch and sat on the top step, and Elias sat beside him. For a while neither man spoke. The wind moved through the grass, and somewhere out in the corral a horse blew and stamped. You know what they are saying in the settlements, Running Elk said. And you know what our own people will say, that she is not of your blood, not of your color, not of anything that ties her to you. I know it. Then why? Elias looked out at the hills, at the long light falling gold across them. He thought about how to say it. There was no clever way. I found her in the storm, he said, near dead, cold as a stone. Somebody fought hard to keep her breathing, and then they were gone, and she was left with no one in the whole world. He was quiet a moment. I could have ridden on, told myself she was somebody else's sorrow. But I have already lived in a house full of empty cradles, brother. I could not make another one and walk away. Running Elk nodded slow. He understood grief. He had stood beside Elias at the graves. Blood is a strong thing, the old chief said, but it is not the only thing. When you were a boy, your father took in orphans of the raids. He fed them, taught them the old ways, called them his own. No one asked whose blood ran in them. He tapped his chest. Family is what a man chooses to protect. Nothing more, nothing less. Elias felt something ease in him at the words, as if a knot he had carried had finally slipped loose. Then you do not think me a fool. I think you are the bravest fool I have known, Running Elk said, and this time he did smile. They sat with that a while, and the sun went down, and Elias built a fire in the pit out front the way they had built 100 fires together on the trail. He brought Rose out wrapped warm against the cool, and she woke and blinked at the flames with wide dark eyes that caught the light. Running Elk watched her, and the fire cracked and popped between them. She will face hard things, the old chief said quietly. The world is not kind to those who do not fit its narrow shapes. I know it. Elias looked down at the child in his arms, at that small trusting face turned up to the firelight. His voice was low and sure. But she will never face them alone. This is her home now. For as long as I draw breath, she will have a roof over her, and food in her belly, and someone standing between her and the whole hard world. He tightened his hold on her, gentle. Let them say what they will. She is mine to protect, and I will protect her no matter what comes. 15 years have a way of turning a ranch into a whole world. The empty cradles were long gone now, chopped for kindling one winter, and burned in the very pit where Elias had once held a tiny girl up to the firelight. In their place stood a home worn smooth by living. There were books on the shelves, more than a frontier ranch had any right to own. There were dresses drying on the line, and a garden fenced against the deer, and the sound of laughter that had, over the years, filled every corner of a house that had once known only silence. And there was Rose. She stood at the corral rail on a bright spring morning, 17 years old, her sleeves rolled to the elbow, guiding a nervous colt in slow circles, with a patience that made Samuel Hayes shake his head in wonder. "Easy now," she murmured to the young horse. "Nobody here is going to hurt you. You just don't know it yet." The colt's ears flicked toward her voice. Little by little it settled. Samuel leaned on the fence beside her, his hat pushed back. "You got away with the scared ones," he said. "Always have." "They just need somebody to be steady," Rose answered. "Somebody who won't quit on them." She had grown tall and strong, with her father's steady eyes and a gentleness all her own. She could read the land the way Elias had taught her, could sit a horse like she was born to it, and could read from books until midnight by the light of a single lamp. She knew her letters and her numbers better than anyone in the settlement, and that was why the schoolhouse 2 towns over had sent word. They wanted a teacher. They wanted Rose. She had not told Elias yet how much it frightened her. Not the teaching, the leaving. From the porch, Elias watched them at the rail, and something in his chest pulled tight. He was 59 now, his black hair streaked with iron, his hands rough as old rope, but his back was still straight and his eyes still missed nothing. He watched his daughter gentle that colt and felt the pride and the sorrow tangle up together the way they always did lately. She was leaving. Not today, not this week, but soon. He had known this day would come. A father always knows. You raise a child to stand on her own 2 feet, and then one day she stands and she walks away from you. That was the whole point of it. That was the whole terrible, beautiful point. Still, it near about broke him. "You're staring, Papa," Rose called without turning around. "I can feel it." A man can look at his own daughter. She grinned over her shoulder. "You look like the colt." All spooked. He came down off the porch and crossed the yard, and she left the young horse to Samuel and met him at the rail. For a moment, they just stood there, the 2 of them, looking out at the hills gone green with spring. "You're afraid I won't come back," she said quietly. He didn't answer right away. He never lied to her, and he wasn't going to start now. "I'm afraid of a great many things," he said, "most of them foolish." Rose slipped her hand into his. Her hand had been so small once, it near about filled his palm now. "Blood tells you where you started," she said, echoing words he'd told her 100 times. "Love tells you where you belong. You taught me that. This is where I belong. Nothing changes that." Elias squeezed her hand and did not trust himself to speak. That was when the sound reached them. Hoofbeats, wheels, a carriage, black and polished, rolling up the long road with 2 fine horses in the traces, and a driver in a city coat. Behind it rode 2 more men on horseback, straight-backed and watchful. Samuel straightened. Rose shaded her eyes. Elias felt every old instinct in his body come awake at once, the scout in him reading the strangers before they'd covered half the distance. Rich men. Rich men did not come to this ranch. Rich men had never once had reason to. The carriage rolled to a stop in the yard, and the dust settled and the door opened. A man stepped down. He was tall and well-dressed, gray at the temples, with a careful, measuring face, and eyes that went straight to Rose and stayed there. "Forgive the intrusion," the man said. His voice was smooth, educated. My name is Nathaniel Whitmore." He looked at Elias, then back at Rose, and something moved behind his eyes that looked almost like grief. "I have traveled a very long way to find this girl, because I know the truth of where she came from." Elias felt the ground shift beneath him. He stepped in front of Rose without thinking, the way he had stood between her and the whole hard world for 15 long years. The fear he had carried since the night of the storm rose up cold in his chest. He was going to lose her. The morning came slow and gray, the sky heavy with clouds that hadn't yet decided to rain. Elias hadn't slept. He'd sat up most of the night by the cold hearth, turning the stranger's words over and over like stones in his hand. He had let Nathaniel Whitmore take a room at the boarding house in town, had told him to come back in the morning, had bought himself a few hours to think. Now the black carriage rolled up the road again, and Elias stood on the porch waiting. "Come inside," he said when the man stepped down. His voice was flat. "Whatever you've got to say, you'll say it under my roof, not in my yard." Nathaniel nodded once and followed him in. The house was quiet. Rose was out at the barn with Samuel, and Elias had asked her to stay there a while. He wasn't ready. He didn't know if he'd ever be ready. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Nathaniel at the rough plank table. He did not sit. He stood near the window where the light was, arms folded, watching this rich man look around at his small life. "You have a fine home," Nathaniel said. "You didn't come all this way to talk about my home." Nathaniel wrapped his hands around the cup, but didn't drink. For a long moment, he was quiet, and when he spoke, the smoothness was gone from his voice. What was left sounded tired, sounded old. "I had a brother," he said. "Charles. He was younger than me by 4 years, and he was the better man of the 2 of us. He married a woman named Adeline." He paused. "She was a free woman, born in the South, and Charles loved her the way the sun loves the morning. They had a daughter." Elias said nothing, but his heart had begun to pound. "Charles is dead now. So is Adeline." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "They died because of what my brother knew and what he refused to keep quiet about. Their daughter vanished the same night, an infant. She was never found." He lifted his eyes to Elias. "I have spent 15 years looking for that child, and I believe with everything in me that she is standing out in your barn right now, gentling a colt." The word 15 landed in the room like a dropped stone. Elias kept his face still, the way he'd learned to as a scout, the way he'd learned to as a chief, but inside, the ground was breaking apart. "You believe," he said slowly. "You don't know." "I know her mother's eyes." Nathaniel reached into his coat and drew out a small painted portrait, oval, framed in tarnished silver. He set it on the table and slid it across the wood. "I carry this everywhere. Look at it and tell me I'm wrong." Elias did not want to look. He looked anyway. A woman's face gazed up at him from the little frame. Dark eyes, a soft, stubborn set to the mouth. And in that face, plain as sunrise, he saw Rose, saw her laugh, her frown, the way she tilted her chin when she was thinking. It was there. It was all there. His hand closed hard on the edge of the table. "She has a family," Nathaniel went on, gentle now, careful, the way a man speaks near something wounded. "A name, a place in the world. There is money set aside, land, everything that was taken from Charles. It belongs to her. She belongs to it." He leaned forward. "Mr. Crow, I have come to bring her home." Home. The word struck Elias like a fist. This was home. This ranch, these hills, this table where a little girl had once banged a wooden spoon and laughed until she hiccuped. This was the only home Rose had ever known, and now a rich man in a fine coat had come to take her to another one. Elias straightened. Every old fear he had carried since the night of the storm rose up in him, cold and certain. He had lost Clara. He had lost Thomas. He had buried them, and he had thought his heart could hold no more grieving. He was wrong. "No," he said, and his voice shook with it. "You're not taking my daughter." The words hung in the air between them, hard and final. Nathaniel did not flinch. He did not argue. He simply looked at Elias for a long, quiet moment, and something in his face softened into sorrow. "I thought you might say that," he said. He rose from the table. He walked to the window and stood beside Elias, both men looking out at the gray morning, at the barn where a girl they both cared about was working with slow, patient hands. "I want you to hear me now," Nathaniel said quietly. "I am not here to take Rose from you." Elias turned his head. "You just said you came to bring her home." "I said what I've told myself for 15 years, that finding her would set something right." Nathaniel let out a slow breath. "But I am an old fool who has spent too long chasing ghosts. I did not come to tear a daughter from her father." He met Elias's eyes. "I came because if I found her, others could too. And the others are not looking to give her a family. They are looking to make sure she never speaks." The cold in Elias's chest changed. It sharpened into something else, something he knew well, the old feeling of a hunter sensing a threat in the trees. "Sit down," Nathaniel said. "Please, let me tell you all of it." This time, Elias sat. Nathaniel wrapped his hands around the cold coffee again, and he began. "My brother Charles wasn't just a wealthy man. He was a man with a conscience, which out here can get you killed faster than a knife. There is a land baron in this territory. His name is Silas Granger." Nathaniel said the name like it tasted foul. He wanted control of the land the railroad would run through, miles of it, land that belonged to settlers, to homesteaders, to native families who'd lived on it longer than any deed could prove. Elias's jaw tightened. He had seen men like Granger. He had seen what they left behind. "Granger didn't buy that land," Nathaniel went on. "He took it. He burned people out. He forged papers. He hired men to frighten and to hurt. And when frightening wasn't enough, he did worse. My brother found out. Charles gathered proof. Names, dates, records of payments, letters. Enough to hang Granger twice over." His voice dropped. "And Granger found out that he knew." The room seemed to grow colder. "They came in the night," Nathaniel said. "They killed Charles. They killed Adeline. They burned the house to the ground and called it an accident." His hands trembled around the cup. "But Adeline was clever, braver than any of us. Before they came, she ran. She took the baby and the proof, and she ran into a storm, trying to reach someone she trusted. She never made it back, and the child was never found." Elias sat very still. Outside, the wind pushed against the glass. 15 years ago, he said slowly. "A storm." "Yes." "On the North Trail, past the ridge." Nathaniel went pale. "How do you know that?" Elias did not answer. He was no longer in the room. He was on that dark, howling trail, rain running down his neck, his horse skittish beneath him. He was kneeling in the mud beside a broken wagon and scattered belongings. He was lifting a small cold bundle from the earth, and inside it, a tiny face, still breathing, still fighting. And he was picking up a leather pouch. A pouch he had never opened. A pouch that had sat in the bottom of a trunk for 15 years, because he had been afraid of what it might tell him, afraid it might name people who could take her away. His breath left him in a rush. She had not been abandoned. She had been hidden, carried through a storm by a mother running for both their lives, left where a man who still believed in mercy would find her. Elias looked at Nathaniel, and the fear that had gripped him all night broke loose and became something harder, something clearer. This was not a fight about who owned Rose. No one owned her. This was about the men who had murdered her mother and father, and would gladly murder her too, to keep an old crime buried. This isn't about taking her home, Elias said quietly. This is about keeping her alive. The days after that morning moved slow, like honey in the cold. Rose could not sleep. She lay awake in the small room Elias had built for her when she was 3, staring at the wooden beams above her head. She knew every knot in that wood. She had counted them 1,000 times as a little girl, waiting for morning, waiting for the smell of coffee and the sound of Elias's boots on the porch. Now, the room felt strange to her. Not because it had changed, because she had. She had another family, a mother named Adeline, a father named Charles, people who had loved her, fought for her, died for her, people whose faces she would never know. The thought sat heavy in her chest. In the morning she wandered out to the barn. The air was cool and smelled of hay and horses. She ran her hand along the rough wooden wall as she walked, feeling every splinter and every smooth spot where years of touching had worn it soft. She stopped at the stall where the old mare stood. Biscuit, the horse Elias had put her on when she was 5 years old, holding her tiny body steady with one strong arm while she gripped the reins and laughed and cried at the same time. "You'll fall 100 times," he had told her back then. But 100 falls means 100 times you got back up. That's what matters, Rose. Not the falling, the getting up. Rose pressed her forehead against the mare's warm neck and closed her eyes. She remembered so much. She remembered winter nights when the wind howled like wolves, and Elias would sit by the fire mending her boots by candlelight, his hands rough and patient. She remembered the day she came home crying, because the girls in town had told her she didn't belong anywhere, that she was neither one thing nor another. She remembered how Elias had knelt down in front of her, wiped her tears with his thumb, and said the words she carried in her heart to this day. Blood may tell you where you started. Love tells you where you belong. And you belong right here, with me. She had believed him. She had believed him every single day of her life. But now there was a letter. Now there was a name. Now there was a whole other story about who she was, and it was pulling at her like a river current, quiet but strong. Rose walked out of the barn and stood in the yard. The mountains rose blue and endless in the distance. The wild roses grew along the fence, the same roses Elias had named her for, blooming bright even in the hard, rocky soil. She had grown here. She had grown strong here, just like those roses, and she could not pretend that the ground she grew from did not matter. That evening she found Elias on the porch, sitting in his old chair, watching the sun sink low and gold behind the hills. She sat down on the step beside his feet, the way she had as a child, and for a while neither of them spoke. "I've been thinking," she finally said. Elias didn't look at her. He just waited the way he always did, patient, steady. "I need to know," Rose said. Her voice shook, but she kept going. "I need to know who she was, my mother. I need to understand what happened to her, and to my father. I can't just close my eyes and pretend that part of me isn't there." She took a breath. "Does that hurt you?" Elias was quiet a long moment. Then he reached down and rested his hand on her shoulder, warm and heavy and sure. "No," he said softly. "It would hurt me more if you didn't want to know." Rose looked up at him, her eyes wet. "I have to find the truth, Papa." The word came out the way it always had, easy and real. But I need you to hear me. Learning where I came from will never change where I belong. Knowing her name won't take away yours. She swallowed hard. You raised me. You chose me. Nothing I find out there will ever erase what you gave me. Nothing. I promise you that. Word travels fast in a small town, faster than any horse. By the end of the week, the story of Rose Crow had spread through the settlement like a grass fire. It moved from the general store to the church steps, from the blacksmith's shop to the well where the women gathered to draw water and share news. Everyone had heard it, and everyone had something to say. Rose is not who she said she was. Rose is the lost daughter of rich folks. There is money involved. There is a secret. She felt the change the moment she rode into town on Saturday morning. The talking stopped when she passed. Heads turned. Whispers followed her like shadows. She hitched Biscuit outside the store and walked inside, holding her chin high the way Elias had taught her. But her heart was pounding. Old Mrs. Fletcher stood at the counter, counting out coins for a sack of flour. When she saw Rose, her face pinched up tight and sour, like she'd bitten into something rotten. Well, the woman said, loud enough for the whole store to hear, if it isn't the mystery girl. First, she's an orphan nobody wanted. Now they say she's got rich blood. She sniffed. Doesn't change what she is, if you ask me. Doesn't change where she came from. Rose stood very still. The words stung, but she did not let them show on her face. Nobody asked you, Edna. The voice came from the doorway. It was Samuel Hayes, Elias's ranch hand, his hat in his hand and his eyes hard as flint. He stepped inside, tall and steady, and let the door swing shut behind him. That girl was raised right by a good man, Samuel said. Better than most in this town were raised. And she's never done a thing to hurt a single soul here. So, you can keep your poison to yourself. A few people looked down at their boots, ashamed. But not everyone. Good man? A rancher named Dobbs snorted from the corner. That Indian took in a child that weren't his, from folks that weren't his kind. That ain't natural, and everybody knows it. Now there's talk of money and lawyers and rich men coming around. You mark me. No good comes from mixing things that don't belong mixed. The room went quiet. Then a small voice spoke up. It was the storekeeper's wife, Mrs. Bell, a gentlewoman with kind eyes. She stepped out from behind the counter and looked around at all of them. I've known Rose since she was knee-high, she said softly. She taught my little Tommy his letters when the schoolmaster wouldn't bother. She sat with my mother the whole night she was dying, holding her hand, singing to her. Her voice trembled. I don't care whose blood she carries. I know her heart, and her heart is the finest in this town. Rose felt her eyes sting. She looked at Mrs. Bell and at Samuel, and something warm rose up inside her, cutting through the cold of all those ugly words. Thank you, she said quietly. She paid for her goods, held her head high, and walked out with Samuel at her side. Behind her, the whispers started up again. But she did not turn around. She had learned long ago that you could not stop people from talking. You could only decide whether to let their words plant roots in your heart. Rose chose not to let them, but far away in a grand house of dark wood and heavy curtains, other ears had heard the news. Silas Granger sat behind his wide desk, a glass of amber whiskey untouched at his elbow. A man stood before him, twisting his hat in his hands, having just finished delivering the report he had ridden 2 days to bring. Say that again, Granger said. His voice was quiet, calm. That was always the most dangerous kind of calm. The Whitmore girl, the man repeated. Charles Whitmore's daughter. Folks thought she died in the mountains 15 years back, but she didn't. She's alive, living out on the Crow Ranch. And her Uncle Nathaniel, He's come looking. There's talk she means to dig into the old business. Papers, land claims, all of it. Granger did not move. He sat very still, staring at nothing, his fingers laced together beneath his chin. 15 years. 15 years he had believed that problem was buried in the cold ground, gone forever, along with the mother who had seen too much. He had built an empire on that grave, land, railroads, power that stretched across half the territory, all of it standing on secrets no one could ever prove. And now a girl had crawled up out of the past to threaten every stone of it. Granger picked up the whiskey at last. He drank it slow, and when he set the empty glass down, his face was smooth and untroubled. "She has to be stopped," he said softly, "before she opens her mouth, before anyone believes her." He looked up at the man. Quietly, "Do you understand me? No noise, no trouble, just gone." The old trunk sat in the corner of the storeroom, half hidden beneath a horse blanket, gone stiff with dust. Elias had not opened it in 15 years. He knelt down slow, his knees creaking, and lifted the lid. The hinges groaned like they were waking from a long sleep. Inside lay the pieces of that night. The torn blanket, faded now to the color of old bone, a tiny knitted cap, and there, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked into the corner, the small leather pouch. His hands trembled as he lifted it out. Rose stood in the doorway, watching him. The lamplight caught the shine in her eyes. She had grown up hearing pieces of this story. The storm, the broken wagon, the way Elias had found her, cold and crying, moments from slipping away. But she had never seen these things, never touched them. "Is that it?" she asked softly. "Is that from that night?" Elias nodded. He could not find his voice. Rose crossed the room and knelt beside him. Together they looked at the pouch, worn smooth by years and weather. On the front was stamped a small emblem, pressed into the leather, a family crest, the mark of the Whitmores. "You never opened it," Rose said. It was not a question. "No." Elias turned it over in his big hands. "I told myself it wasn't mine to open, that whatever was inside belonged to you, and you were too little to understand." He swallowed hard. "But that's not the whole truth. The truth is, I was scared of what it might say, scared it might tell me you belonged to somebody else, that someday somebody would come and take you away." He looked up at her, and his weathered face was open in a way she had rarely seen. "I reckon that day has come anyhow," he said quietly. Rose put her hand over his. "Then let's read it together, Pa." The word landed on him soft and heavy at once. Pa. She had called him that her whole life, but tonight it felt like a rope thrown to a drowning man. Elias worked the old ties loose. The leather cracked at the fold. Inside was a folded paper, yellowed and brittle, sealed once with wax that had long since broken. He drew it out with the care of a man handling something holy. Rose unfolded it. The writing was small and neat, though the letters slanted and shook near the end, as if the hand that wrote them had been racing against time. She read aloud, her voice low in the still room. "To whoever finds my daughter, her name is not written here, for names can be hunted. But she is loved beyond measure. I am running now, and I do not think I will reach the far side of these mountains alive." Rose's breath caught. Elias placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. She read on. "There is a man in this territory, an Apache scout, once a war chief. His name is Elias Crow. Years ago, I saw him defend a settler family that others would have left to die. I saw him carry a wounded stranger 3 days through the snow because it was the right thing to do. He does not know me, but I know him. I know his heart." Elias went very still. His jaw tightened. He stared at the words as though they might vanish if he looked away. Rose kept reading, tears sliding down her cheeks now. A cruel man named Silas Granger destroyed my family for his railroad and his greed. He will not stop until every witness is silent. If he finds my child, he will end her too. So I am leaving her on the trail that runs past the Crow Ranch, praying with all that is left in me that Elias Crow will find her first. If my child survives, give her to the man who still believes kindness is stronger than fear. Tell her that her mother did not abandon her. I chose him. I chose him because I believe he will love her when no one else will. The paper trembled in Rose's hands. You didn't find me by accident, she whispered. She looked up at Elias, her whole face shining. She chose you. She trusted you before she ever met you. Elias could not speak. For 15 years he had believed he had simply stumbled onto a child the world had thrown away. But he had not stumbled. He had been chosen. Morning came soft and gray over the ranch. Elias sat at the kitchen table with a tin cup of coffee gone cold in his hands. He had not slept. The letter lay open on the wood between them, smoothed flat, the corners weighted down with a spoon and a small stone Rose had carried in from the yard as a girl. Neither of them wanted to fold it away again. It felt like closing a door on someone who had only just walked in. Rose came in wearing her mother's shawl, the one Clara had knitted long ago. She poured herself coffee and sat across from him. The light through the window caught the steam rising from her cup. I keep thinking about her, Rose said. My mother. Out there in the storm, knowing she wasn't going to make it. And still she thought about me. Still she found a way. Elias nodded slow. That's the truest kind of love there is. The kind that don't ask nothing back. She gave up her own life to buy you yours. Rose stared into her cup. I always wondered deep down if she just didn't want me, if I was something she needed to be rid of. I never told you that. I didn't want you to feel bad. She swallowed. But now I know. She wanted me more than anything. She wanted me so bad she was willing to die alone in the cold so I could live. Elias reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His fingers were rough and warm. Listen to me, Rose, he said. Your mother didn't leave you behind. She sent you ahead. She sent you towards something better than what was chasing her. That last thing she ever did on this earth was make sure you'd be loved and safe. That was her wish. Her only wish. He drew a breath that shook a little. And I mean to tell you, I've done my level best to keep it, every single day. I hope she'd think I done right by you. Rose's eyes filled. You did more than right by me. You gave me everything. They sat in the quiet a while. Outside, a rooster called and one of the horses stamped in the corral. The world went on, the way it always did, no matter what a heart was carrying. I used to think family was blood, Rose said finally. I used to think it meant looking like each other, coming from the same place. But that's not it at all, is it? No, Elias said. It ain't. Family is who stays. Rose looked at him. It's who shows up in the storm. It's who chooses you when nobody makes them. My mother chose you because she knew that. And you chose me. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. That's more family than most folks ever get. Elias's throat worked. For a man who had spent so many years locking his heart behind stone, the words came hard. But they came. When I found you, he said, I was already dead inside. I'd buried my wife and my boy, and I figured I'd bury myself right along with them, just slower. Then there you were, this tiny thing hollering into the rain like you had every right to live. A rough laugh escaped him. You gave me a reason to get up in the morning. You saved me every bit as much as I saved you. Maybe more. Rose came around the table and put her arms around him. He held her the way he had held her the night he found her, careful and fierce all at once. Whatever comes next, she said against his shoulder, whatever the Whitmores tell me, whatever I learn about where I started, none of it can change this. You hear me, Pa? No paper, no crest, no inheritance can buy back the father I already have. You're mine. I'm yours. That's settled, and it's settled forever. Elias closed his eyes and let the truth of it wash over him. Then he drew back, and his face hardened with a different resolve. Then there's just one thing left, he said. Silas Granger. That man killed your mother sure as if he'd left her in that storm himself. He's still out there, still rich, still walking free. His jaw set like iron. We can't let that stand. Not for her. Not for you. Rose nodded, her tears drying into something stronger. No, she said. We can't. He has to be stopped. The work began the very next morning. Nathaniel Whitmore arrived at the ranch in a fine black coat, but he left it hanging on a peg by the door and rolled up his sleeves like any working man. He spread papers across the kitchen table where the letter had lain the night before. Deeds, contracts, bank ledgers copied out in a careful hand. My brother kept records, Nathaniel said. He was a cautious man. When Granger started buying up the valley, my brother saw the pattern before anyone else did. Families selling for a tenth of what the land was worth, then dying, then their kin selling too, quick and scared. Elias studied the papers. He could not read fast, but he could read the truth in numbers when it stared back at him. Column after column showed the same story. Land bought for nearly nothing, sold to the railroad for a fortune. Blood money, he said quietly. Every acre of it. Nathaniel agreed. Rose leaned over the table, her finger tracing the names. These are real people. Every one of these is somebody's home. Some of them are still alive, Nathaniel said. That's where we start. So they rode out. The first survivor was an old man named Josiah Bell, living alone in a leaning cabin at the edge of the valley. He had lost his wife and his farm the same winter. When Rose sat beside him and asked him gently to tell his story, the old man wept like it had happened yesterday. Granger's men came at night, he said. Said if I didn't sign, I'd lose more than my land. I signed. Next week, my barn burned anyhow. My wife took sick from the cold after. Never got warm again. He wiped his eyes. Nobody ever asked me before. Nobody ever wanted to hear? Rose held his hand. We do, she said. We want to hear all of it. They rode to another farm, then another. A widow near the river. A pair of brothers who had fled to a mining camp. 2 families who had lost sons that stood up to Granger and never came home. One by one, the stories piled up like stones. And one by one, Rose wrote them down in a leather book, her hand steady and sure. Elias watched his daughter work and felt something swell in his chest. She had a way with people. She sat with the frightened and the beaten down, and she made them believe that speaking out could matter, that they were not alone anymore. She's remarkable, Nathaniel said one evening, watching her comfort a trembling old woman on a porch. She has her mother's fire. Elias said nothing, but he stood a little taller. Back at the ranch, Samuel Hayes helped too. He rode into town and listened at the general store and the livery, quiet as a shadow, gathering the whispers folks let slip when they thought no one important was listening. He came back with names of men who had worked for Granger and grown sick of it. There's a fella named Pratt, Samuel said. Used to ride with Granger's crew. Drinks too much now on account of what he's seen. He'll talk if we're careful with him. They were careful. Pratt talked, and what he said matched the ledgers and the survivors word for word. The fires, the threats, the men who disappeared. He even named the night Rose's mother's wagon had been run off the mountain road. The evidence grew. It stacked up in Rose's leather book and Nathaniel's ledgers until it could no longer be ignored. And slowly, the town began to shift. It started small. Folks who had crossed the street to avoid Elias for 15 years now nodded to him at the mercantile. The widow, Josiah Bell, had told his story to her neighbor, and that neighbor told another. The stories spread like water finding cracks in dry ground. At the church social, Samuel heard two ranchers arguing. "That Crow fella," one said. "Maybe we had him wrong all these years." "And Granger," said the other, lowering his voice. "Maybe we had him wrong too. Maybe worse than wrong." By week's end, the town that had once whispered against Elias Crow was whispering something new. It was questioning everything it thought it knew about the scout who had raised a black child, and about the rich man they had all been afraid to cross. The town hall had never held so many people. Folks came in from every corner of the valley. Ranchers in their Sunday best, farmers with dust still on their boots. Women who had spent the morning baking bread now sat shoulder to shoulder on hard wooden benches. The room smelled of sweat and coffee and the particular hush of people waiting for something big. Elias sat near the front, his hat in his lap, his hands folded over the brim. Beside him sat Nathaniel, calm and steady, his ledgers stacked neat as bricks on the table before them. Samuel leaned against the back wall with his arms crossed, watching the door. And Rose stood at the front of it all. She wore a simple blue dress, her leather book held against her chest like something precious. Her hands did not shake. Elias had watched her practice her words all week, whispering them to the horses in the barn, and now here she was, 17 years old, standing before the whole town that had once said she did not belong. The judge, a gray man from the county seat, rapped his gavel. "This hearing will come to order. We are here to consider testimony regarding the conduct of Mr. Silas Granger. Miss Crow, you asked to speak first." "I did, sir." Rose lifted her chin. "Thank you." She looked out at the crowd, at the faces that had crossed the street to avoid her father, at the faces that had softened over these past weeks. "Most of you have known my name for 15 years, she began. "Not because you knew me, but because of what I am. A black child raised by an Apache man on a ranch outside your town. I know what you said about him, about us. I heard it my whole life." A few folks looked down at their hands. 15 years ago, a wagon was run off the mountain road in a storm, Rose went on. My mother died protecting me. She left me wrapped in a torn blanket beside the trail, cold and half gone, because she trusted one man in all this world to find me and keep me safe. She opened her book and read the words her mother had written. Her voice held steady, but it trembled at the edges, the way a candle flame trembles without going out. "If my child survives, give her to the man who still believes kindness is stronger than fear." The room was silent. Not a boot shifted. That man was Elias Crow. Rose turned and looked at him. The world told him I did not belong, that I was somebody else's problem, that a man like him had no business raising a child like me. And he told them all the same thing. He said, "A child does not belong to the people who abandon her. She belongs to the person who refuses to leave her behind." Elias felt his throat go tight. He had not known she remembered those words. He had said them so long ago to a town that would not listen. They were listening now. "He taught me to ride," Rose said. "To read the land. To stand tall when folks told me to sit down. He never once made me feel I was less. And the man who tried to kill my mother, the man who burned homes and buried families for the price of a railroad line, That man still walks free among you." She looked out at them all. "I am done being afraid of him. Are you?" For a long moment, nobody moved. Then old Josiah Bell rose from his bench, his knees cracking, his hat clutched in his fist. "I'll tell it," he said, his voice shaking. "I'll tell what Granger's men did to me and my wife. I'll tell all of it." "So will I," said the widow from the river, standing. The two brothers from the mining camp got to their feet. Then Pratt, pale and sober, rose slow from the back. One by one they stood until half the room was standing, and the standing spread like fire catching dry grass. Nathaniel laid his hand flat on his ledgers. "The records are here," he said to the judge. "Every deed, every dollar. It's all here." The judge looked out over the crowd of standing witnesses, and he set down his gavel. "Then let us hear them," he said. "All of them." The victory did not last the night. Elias woke to the smell of smoke. He knew that smell the way a man knows the sound of his own heart. He was on his feet before his eyes were fully open, pulling on his boots, moving toward the window. Down past the barn, near the edge of his land, an orange glow flickered against the dark. "Samuel," he called. "Rose, wake up." He was out the door in a breath, the cold night air biting at his skin. The little storage shed behind the barn was burning, the one where Nathaniel had kept copies of the records, locked away for safekeeping. Elias ran, but he already knew. By the time he reached it, the flames had climbed too high. The heat pushed him back like a hand against his chest. Hoofbeats. He turned. 3 riders galloped away across the far field, low in their saddles, their faces hidden beneath dark hats. Elias watched them go, his fists tight at his sides. He knew who had sent them. There was no need to guess. Samuel came running, a bucket already in his hand, but it was no use. The shed folded in on itself with a groan and a shower of sparks. They stood together and watched it burn down to black bones. "The copies," Samuel said. "They're gone." Elias said nothing. His jaw was set like stone. Rose stood in the doorway of the house, a blanket pulled around her shoulders, her eyes wide with the fire's light. She did not cry, but Elias saw the way her hand gripped the doorframe, the way her whole body had gone still, and it broke something inside him. "Go back inside, Rose," he said gently. "It's all right. We still have the letter. We still have Nathaniel's ledgers in town." But even as he said it, a cold worry crept up his spine. They rode into town at first light. The streets were too quiet. Folks stood in doorways and whispered as Elias passed, and the whispers were not the soft kind that had grown over these past weeks. They were the old kind, sharp, fearful. Nathaniel met them outside the town hall, his face gray as ash. "The ledgers are gone," he said. "Someone broke the lock on the county office last night. Every record I brought, all of it, taken." "How?" Rose breathed. "Granger has men everywhere, clerks, deputies, men who owe him." Nathaniel dragged a hand down his face. "He waited until we showed our whole hand, and then he swept the table clean." Elias felt the ground shift beneath him. He had seen this before in other towns, in other years. Powerful men did not fight fair. They did not need to. The sheriff came down the steps then, and behind him walked Silas Granger himself, dressed fine as a Sunday preacher, a slow smile spreading across his face. He tipped his hat to Rose as though they were old friends. "Elias Crow," the sheriff said. His voice was heavy, like he did not want the words in his mouth. "I've got a warrant for your arrest." "On what charge?" Samuel stepped forward. "Interfering with a legal proceeding, tampering with county records." The sheriff would not meet Elias's eyes. "There's men who'll swear they saw you at the county office last night. Says you set that fire on your own land to blame it on Mr. Granger here." "That's a lie," Rose said. Her voice cracked like a whip. He was home. He was with us the whole night. I'm sure that's what a daughter would say, Granger said smoothly. Elias looked at the man. He looked at the smile. And he understood, with a terrible clearness, what was happening. They meant to make him the criminal, to turn the town's fear back against him, to take everything Rose had built with her courage the day before and bury it in the dust. Papa, Rose whispered. Elias turned to her. He wanted to hold her, to tell her it would be all right, but the sheriff's hand was already on his arm. Don't fight it, Elias, the sheriff murmured. Please. So he didn't. He let them take his hat. He let them bind his wrists. And as they led him toward the jailhouse, he looked back once at Rose, standing frozen in the cold morning light, unable to move, unable to help, her father being carried away before her eyes. The jailhouse was cold and smelled of iron and old dust. Rose came at first light, a basket on her arm. Though her hands shook so badly, the bread inside had nearly tumbled out twice on the walk over. The deputy at the door looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside and let her pass. Elias sat on a narrow cot behind the bars, his back straight, his hands folded. He did not look like a beaten man. He never had, but Rose saw the tiredness in his eyes, the gray shadows beneath them, and it made her chest ache. Papa, she said. He rose and came to the bars, his fingers wrapped around the cold iron, and for a moment neither of them spoke. She reached through and took his hand. It was warm. It was steady. It was the same hand that had lifted her onto her first horse, that had wiped her tears, that had held her when the world called her names she did not understand. You shouldn't have come, he said softly. Where else would I be? He almost smiled. Almost. Then his face grew serious, and she knew what was coming before he said it. She had known since she woke that morning to an empty house. Rose, listen to me now. His voice was low and even. You need to leave. Today. Go with Nathaniel. She pulled her hand back. No. He can take you east, to your family's people, to schools, to a good life, to a place where no one will look at you sideways. His eyes held hers, and there was something desperate in them, something she had rarely seen. You have a future waiting, a real one. Don't throw it into the fire for a man locked in a cage. You are not a man in a cage, she said. You are my father. Rose. No. Her voice broke, but she did not look away. You listen to me now. He went quiet. She saw his jaw tighten. When I was a baby, the whole world walked past me, she said. The storm, the road, the folks who could have stopped. Everybody left. Everybody but you. Her eyes filled, but the tears did not fall. She would not let them. You could have ridden on too. It would have been easier, safer. Nobody would have blamed you. But you didn't. You picked me up out of the mud and you carried me home. Elias closed his eyes. So, you tell me. Rose went on, and her voice steadied now, growing stronger with every word. How am I supposed to ride away and leave you here? How could I ever live that good life you talk about, knowing I did to you exactly what everyone else did to me? It is different, he said, but the words had no weight. It is the same. She stepped close to the bars. You taught me that courage is not having no fear. Courage is doing what's right, even when you're scared, clean through. Well, I am scared, Papa. I am scared to death, but I am not leaving. For a long moment, he only looked at her. Then his shoulders sank, and something in his face gave way, like a wall that had held back a river far too long. You always did listen too well, he murmured. I had a good teacher. He reached through the bars and cupped her cheek in his rough hand. She leaned into it. Outside, a wagon rolled past, and somewhere a rooster crowed into the gray morning. But inside that cold room, it was only the two of them. "They burned the papers," she said. "They stole the ledgers. They think that means they've won." She wiped her face with the back of her hand and lifted her chin. "But they forgot something." "What's that?" "They forgot about me." She looked at him, and in her eyes was the same fire that had once glowed against the storm, the fire that refused to go out. "I still have Mama's letter. I still have Nathaniel. And I have every word you ever taught me about doing what's right." She squeezed his hand hard. "I'm going to prove you're innocent, Papa. I don't care what it costs me. You saved my life once. Now it's my turn to fight for yours." The days that followed passed in a blur of dust and effort. Rose did not sleep much. She could not. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her father behind those iron bars, sitting straight and proud while the town whispered lies about him. So instead of sleeping, she worked. She met Nathaniel each morning at the little room he had taken above the general store. He had turned it into a kind of war camp. Papers covered the table. Maps lay pinned to the walls. A lamp burned low into the night, its glass smudged black from the hours it had been left glowing. "They were thorough," Nathaniel said one morning, rubbing his tired eyes. He was a tall man, well-dressed, but the fine cut of his coat could not hide how worn down he had become. Granger burned every ledger in the county clerk's office, every record that tied him to the stolen land. Gone. Ash and smoke. Rose sat across from him, her jaw set. "Then we find what he missed?" "Rose," he looked at her gently, "a man like Silas Granger does not make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes." She leaned forward. "Papa always said the land remembers what men try to forget. There is always a trail. You just have to be willing to follow it." Nathaniel studied her for a long moment. Then slowly, he smiled. "You sound just like the man they've locked up." "Good," she said. "So they followed the trail?" They rode out to the burned families' homesteads, the ones Granger had driven off their land. Rose spoke to the people others had ignored. A widow named Mrs. Foley, whose husband had died fighting Granger's men. An old rancher who had signed papers he could not read, papers that stole everything he had. A boy no older than 12 who remembered the day the riders came. Rose listened. She wrote down every word. She held their hands when they cried, and she looked them square in the eye when they were afraid. "They won't listen to us," Mrs. Foley said, her voice bitter. "Folks like us. Folks like you." "They'll listen," Rose said, "because we won't stop talking until they do." And something happened as she moved through the county, gathering these broken pieces. The people who had once turned away began to open their doors. They saw a young woman who would not quit, a young woman fighting not for herself, but for the man who had raised her. Word spread. Slowly, quietly, but it spread. At night, Rose read her mother's letter again and again until she knew every line by heart. "If my child survives, give her to the man who still believes kindness is stronger than fear." She traced the words with her finger and felt her mother close, felt Elias close, felt the strength of two people who had both chosen to fight for her. Now it was her turn. On the 5th day, everything changed. Nathaniel spread a set of railroad papers across the table, documents his own company had kept. "These are shipping records," he explained. "Every crate Granger's men moved through the rail line this past year. He couldn't burn these. They were never in the county office. They were in my own files back east." Rose bent over the pages, reading fast. Then she stopped. Her finger froze on a single line. "Nathaniel." Her voice came out in a whisper. "Look at this." He leaned in. 3 crates, she read aloud. "Shipped from Granger's ranch to a storehouse near the old mill. Marked as tools and dry goods." She looked up, her heart pounding against her ribs. "But the weight is wrong. way too heavy for tools. And why would a man ship dry goods away from town, out to an empty mill in the middle of the night? Nathaniel's eyes widened as understanding dawned. He didn't burn the ledgers, Rose breathed. Not all of them. He couldn't. He needed to keep proof of his own dealings in case his partners ever turned on him. A man like Granger doesn't trust anyone. She stood, the chair scraping back beneath her. He hid them. He hid them at the mill. Her hands were shaking again. But this time it was not fear. It was hope. I can save him, she whispered. Nathaniel, I can save Papa. The old mill sat like a forgotten bone against the gray morning sky. Its roof sagged. Its windows were dark and empty. Rose rode hard, Nathaniel close behind her, the wind pulling at her hair as the ground rolled beneath the horses' hooves. They found the crates buried under rotting hay in the back room, just as she had known they would. Rose pried the first one open with a crowbar. The wood cracked and split. Inside, wrapped careful in oilcloth, lay stacks of ledgers, real ones, filled with Granger's own hand, names, dates, dollar amounts paid to men who wore badges, and men who signed false papers. Nathaniel lifted one out and turned the pages slowly. His face went pale. It's all here, he said. Every crime, every man he paid. He kept it like a snake keeps its venom. For protection. Rose pressed a hand to her chest. She could barely breathe. He kept it to threaten his partners. And now it's going to bury him. They loaded the ledgers into saddlebags. Rose worked fast, her hands sure now, her heart steady. She thought of her father sitting in that cold cell. She thought of Mrs. Foley's bitter voice, of the boy who had watched the riders come. She thought of her mother, writing those final words by lamplight, trusting a stranger to save her child. She would not let any of them down. Word went out that afternoon. Rose herself rode from door to door, and behind her rode Nathaniel, and behind him rode Samuel Hayes, who had spread the news across every ranch and homestead he could reach. By evening, the town hall was packed. People stood shoulder to shoulder. They filled the aisles. They crowded the doorway and spilled out onto the wooden walk. The judge sat at the front, an old man with tired eyes. Silas Granger sat too, dressed fine, his mouth curled in a thin smile. He was not worried. Men like him were never worried. Rose walked to the front of the room. Her legs shook, but she remembered what her father had taught her. Courage is not having no fear. Courage is choosing what is right despite fear. She set the ledgers on the table with a heavy thud. My name is Rose Crow, she said. Her voice rang clear through the silent hall. And the man you locked up is not a criminal. He is my father, and he is the bravest man I have ever known. Granger's smile flickered. You burned the county records, she said, turning to him. You thought you burned them all, but you kept your own, right here. She opened the first ledger and held it high. Every payment, every stolen deed, every family you drove off their land, it's all written in your own hand. Nathaniel stepped forward and laid the railroad papers beside them. The shipping records match, he told the judge. Crate for crate. There is no denying it. A murmur rose through the crowd. It grew louder. Mrs. Foley stood, her chin high. So did the old rancher. So did the boy gripping his mother's hand. Granger shot to his feet. This is nonsense. That girl has no standing here. She is nobody. She is somebody, Nathaniel said sharply. She is my niece, the daughter of my late brother, and she is the reason your empire is ending today. The room erupted. Rose lifted her hand, and slowly, the noise died down. Then she reached into her coat and drew out the letter. The paper was soft now, worn thin from her fingers. There is one more thing you should hear, she said quietly. This is a letter my mother wrote before she died, before she left me on a mountain trail in the middle of a storm. She unfolded it with trembling care. She was running from that man. She pointed at Granger. He destroyed her family. He hunted her. And with her last strength, she made a choice for me. Rose began to read. If my child survives, give her to the man who still believes kindness is stronger than fear. Her voice broke, but she did not stop. She knew Elias Crow. She knew what kind of man he was. So she left me where he would find me. She did not abandon me. Tears slid down her cheeks. She trusted him. She chose him, because she knew he would love me when the whole world would not. The hall had gone utterly still. He did not steal a child, Rose said. He saved one. He gave up his quiet life, faced every cruel word this town threw at him, and raised me as his own. He asked for nothing. Nothing but the chance to give a frightened baby a home. She looked out at the faces before her. Mrs. Foley was weeping. The old rancher had bowed his head. Even the judge had leaned forward, his tired eyes shining. And in that moment, the town finally understood. The man they had jailed, the man they had whispered about, the warrior they had feared, had done the greatest thing a person could do. He had sacrificed everything for one innocent child who had no one else in the world. Elias Crow was no criminal. He was a hero. The judge lifted a hand. His voice was steady, worn smooth by years of hard truths. Let the witnesses speak, he said. One by one they came forward. The old rancher rose first. His hands shook as he gripped the back of the chair before him. Granger took my land in the spring of '75, he said. Told me I signed it over. I never did. I couldn't even read the paper he shoved in my face. When I fought it, his men burned my barn. He looked straight at Silas. I lost 40 head of cattle that night. I lost everything but my life. And some nights I wished I'd lost that too. He sat down heavy. Then came a woman with gray in her hair and iron in her spine. She spoke of a husband who had disappeared after refusing to sell. She spoke of a grave she had never found. Then the boy. He stood on wobbly legs, his mother's hand on his shoulder. His voice was small but clear. I saw the riders come, he said. They wore no badges that night, but I saw the man who paid them. I saw him counting the money out on our porch. He pointed. It was him. Granger's jaw tightened. His fine smile had gone thin and hard. Nathaniel stepped forward again. He opened the ledgers on the table, one after another, and laid the railroad papers beside them. He spoke slow and careful, the way a man speaks when every word must land. Here, he said, tapping a page. A payment to Sheriff Coles, $200. Dated the same week the county records show a deed transferred from the Hensley family to the Granger holdings. The Hensleys never sold. They fled. He turned another page. Here, a payment to a clerk named Dobbs to sign false papers. And here, the shipping crates that carried these very ledgers to the old mill where Silas hid them. The dates match, the names match, the amounts match. There is no story he can tell that these numbers do not break. The judge leaned over the pages. He read a long while. The hall held its breath. Then Rose spoke once more. She folded her mother's letter and held it against her heart. My mother had no land for him to steal, she said softly. She only had the truth. She saw what he did, and for that, he hunted her like an animal. She died running, but before she did, she made sure her child would live. Her voice did not break this time. It rang. That is the man you see before you. A man who kills mothers and steals from the poor and buys the law like it was cattle at market. Silas Granger shot to his feet. His chair clattered backward. You will not do this, he said. His voice cracked with fury. Do you know who I am? I built this territory. I built the roads under your feet. You are nothing without me. All of you." No one answered him. The silence was answer enough. The judge set down the ledger. He removed his spectacles and rubbed his tired eyes. When he spoke, his voice filled the room. "I have sat on this bench for 30 years, he said. "I have seen good men lie and bad men weep, but I have never seen guilt written so plain in a man's own hand." He looked at Silas. "Silas Granger, this court finds you guilty. Guilty of fraud. Guilty of theft. Guilty of murder by hire." A sound went through the crowd like wind through wheat. "You will be held until you are moved to the territorial prison," the judge went on. "And every acre, every deed, every dollar you took from the families in this room will be returned, down to the last penny." The sheriff's deputy stepped forward with iron cuffs. Granger backed away, his eyes wild now, his fine coat suddenly too large for the small trembling man inside it. "You can't," he whispered. "You can't." But they could. And they did. The cuffs closed around his wrists with a cold click. He was let out through the crowd, and the people parted to let him pass. Not one hand reached for him. Not one voice rose in his defense. The old rancher wept openly. The gray-haired woman closed her eyes. The boy watched the man go, and for the first time, his small shoulders relaxed. Rose stood at the front of the hall, her mother's letter pressed to her chest, and watched the door swing shut behind Silas Granger for the last time. The morning sun broke clean over the town. It spilled gold across the muddy street and warmed the tin roofs still damp from the night's rain. Elias came out of the jailhouse, a free man. He blinked against the light. The chains were gone from his wrists, but he moved slow, the way a man moves when he has forgotten how to walk without weight pulling him down. His shoulders were stiff. His face was tired. 15 years of hard looks and cold words had carved themselves into the lines around his eyes. He stopped on the wooden steps. The whole town was waiting for him. They filled the street. Ranchers and shopkeepers, mothers with babies on their hips, old men who had crossed to the other side of the road for years just to avoid him. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the mud, and not one of them was smiling the way people smile when they want something. They were ashamed. Elias saw it in their faces. He had seen shame before, on men who had done wrong and knew it, but this was different. This was a whole town looking at itself in a mirror and not liking what stared back. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Samuel Hayes stepped out from the crowd. His hat was in his hands. He turned it round and round by the brim, the way he did when words came hard. "Elias," he said. His voice was thick. "I stood by you all these years, but I never made these folks see. I should have tried harder. I'm sorry for that." Elias said nothing. He only looked at his friend, and something in his eyes softened. Then the old rancher who had spoken at the trial came forward. He leaned on a cane. His boots sank in the mud, but he did not seem to mind. "Mr. Crow," he said, "I called you names, behind your back and to your face. I said you had no business raising that girl." He swallowed hard. His old eyes went wet. "I was a fool. I let my fear do my thinking, and I am too old now to keep being a fool. So I'll say it plain. I was wrong about you. Wrong about her. I hope you can find it in yourself to forgive an old man his blindness." He held out a shaking hand. Elias looked at it. Then he took it. He shook it firm and gentle both. That broke something loose. The gray-haired woman came next, her eyes down. "I crossed the street from your Rose more times than I can count," she whispered. "And she never once looked at me with anything but kindness. I don't deserve that. But I'm sorry all the same." Then the mother with the small boy. Then the shopkeeper who had once refused to sell Rose sugar for her birthday cake. Then more and more, until the whole street was a river of quiet voices, each one saying the same thing. We were wrong. We are sorry. Rose stood beside her father. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. She reached out and slipped her hand into his. Elias felt the crowd waiting for him to speak, waiting to know if he would forgive them or turn his back the way they had turned theirs for so long. He looked out at all those faces, and when he spoke, his voice was rough, but it carried. I hear you, he said. Every word, and I thank you for it. It takes a strong person to say they were wrong, stronger than most folks ever manage. He paused. He looked down at Rose, then back at the crowd. But you owe me no apology for what I did, he said. I found a child on a dark road. She was cold. She was alone. She would have died before morning. He shook his head slow. I didn't do anything special. I did what any parent should do when a child needs someone. I stayed, that's all. Any of you would have wished you'd done the same. The crowd began to thin as the morning wore on. Folks went back to their shops and their chores, but they walked lighter than they had come. Something had shifted in that muddy street. You could feel it in the air, the way you can feel a storm break and give way to clear sky. Nathaniel Whitmore had stood at the edge of it all, watching. Now he stepped forward. He was a tall man, dressed fine, his boots polished even in all that mud. But there was nothing proud in the way he carried himself. Only a quiet patience and something in his eyes that looked almost like hope. Rose, he said, may I speak with you? Rose looked up at Elias. Her father gave a small nod. So she let go of his hand and walked with Nathaniel a little ways off to where an old oak stood at the end of the street. Its leaves were still dripping from the rain. Nathaniel took off his hat. He held it against his chest. I have thought long about how to say this, he began, and I still don't have the right words, so I'll just say it plain, the way that old rancher did. Rose waited. You are my brother's daughter, he said, his only child. When he died and your mother with him, I thought I had lost the last piece of my family. For 15 years I searched. I never stopped believing you were alive somewhere. His voice cracked. And here you are, all grown. Braver than any of us. Rose's throat went tight. I have a home in the East, Nathaniel went on. A big house, land, more money than one man could ever need. There are schools there, Rose, the finest in the country. You could study, you could travel, you could see the world your mother dreamed you might see. He drew a breath. You would never want for anything again. No cold winters on a struggling ranch, no cruel words, no people crossing the street to avoid you. I can give you the life you were born to have, the life your mother wanted for you. Rose looked down at her hands. They were not soft hands. They were rough from ranch work, from mending fences and brushing horses and hauling water. She had earned every callus. That is a kind offer, she said softly. And I know it comes from love. I can see that now. She looked back toward the jailhouse steps where Elias stood waiting. He was not calling her. He was not pulling her back. He only stood there still and steady, the way he had stood every day of her life, ready to let her choose. That was the thing about her father. He had never once held her too tight. He had spent 15 years teaching her how to stand on her own 2 feet, even knowing those feet might one day carry her away from him. And that, she understood now, was the deepest kind of love there was. Mr. Whitmore, Rose said. She turned back to him. I want to know my mother. I want to hear every story you have of my father. I want to learn where I come from, and I want to carry their name with pride, because they died fighting so that I could live. Her voice grew stronger. I would be honored to be part of your family, to know my blood." Nathaniel's eyes filled. He opened his mouth, but Rose held up a gentle hand. "But I will not leave," she said. "Not to trade one father for another. Not to trade this hard, beautiful place for an easy one." She looked once more at Elias, and the tears spilled over. "My mother left me on that road because she trusted one man in all the world to raise me right," Rose said. "And she was right to trust him. He found me when the world left me behind. He taught me I was worth saving. He gave me his name, and he gave me his heart." She pressed a hand to her own chest. "Everything I am, he made. My blood came from my mother and father. But who I am came from Elias Crow." She smiled through her tears. "I can honor where I started," she said, "and still choose where I belong. And I belong here, with the father who stayed." The little schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, right where the prairie began to stretch out wide and golden. It was a small building, one room with a slanted roof and a bell that hung crooked from a wooden post. But to Rose, it was the finest place in all of Montana. She had swept every corner herself. She had washed the windows until they shone. She had gathered wildflowers from along the creek and set them in a jar on her desk. And now, on the first morning of school, the light came through the clean glass and fell across the wooden floor like something holy. The children came in slow. Some of them walked miles to get there. There were ranch children with dirt under their nails and hair still damp from a quick wash. There were the sons and daughters of shopkeepers. There were 2 Apache children who lived with their families out past the ridge, and a boy named Eli, whose mother took in laundry, and a shy little girl who had never once been to a school because her folks had been told there was no place for her. Rose greeted each one at the door. She learned their names before they even found their seats. "Come in," she said again and again, her voice warm as a fire in winter. "This is your school too, every one of you." Some of the children had been taught to keep apart. You could see it in the way they sat, careful not to touch, careful not to look. But Rose had a way about her. She asked them questions and listened close to their answers. She laughed at their jokes. She told them there were no wrong questions in her room, only questions that had not been asked yet. By the end of that first week, the children who had come in like strangers were sharing their lunches. By the end of the first month, they were choosing seats beside one another without a second thought. Word of it spread through town. At first, some folks grumbled. They said a school like that would never last. They said children ought to be kept with their own kind. But their children came home talking about Miss Rose, about the stories she told and the way she made a hard sum feel like a game, about how she had said each of them was made for something good, and it is a hard thing to argue against a child's joy. Slowly, the grumbling faded. Parents who had once crossed the street to avoid Rose now tipped their hats to her. Samuel Hayes said he had never seen the town so quiet on a Monday morning, on account of all the children rushing off to school before the sun was even full up. Rose came home to the ranch each evening. She had chosen a small room off the schoolhouse for the busy days, but her heart lived on that land, and most nights she rode back to it. She would sit on the porch with Elias and tell him everything. The boy who finally learned his letters, the girl who had not spoken a word for weeks, and then, one afternoon, raised her hand. Elias listened to all of it. He did not say much. He never had. But his eyes followed her as she spoke, and something in his weathered face had gone soft and full. One golden afternoon, Elias rode out to the schoolhouse to bring Rose a basket of food. He meant only to leave it and go. But he stopped at the edge of the yard, and he stayed. Through the open window, he watched. Rose stood before all those children, chalk in her hand, her voice rising and falling like a song. The children leaned toward her, the way young plants lean toward the sun. Apache and white and black, ranch child and town child, all of them together in one room, all of them believing what she told them, that they mattered, that they belonged, that they were worth something in this world. Elias felt his chest tighten. He remembered a tiny thing wrapped in a torn blanket beside a storm-swept road. Cold, hungry, left behind by a world that had no place for her. And now here she stood, giving other children the very thing he had given her. The child he had saved had grown into someone who saved others. The years had been kind to the old ranch. Elias sat in his chair on the wide porch, a wool blanket across his knees, watching the sun slip low over the mountains. The sky had turned the color of ripe peaches, all soft gold and rose. The land glowed in that gentle light, the same land he had ridden alone for so many years, back when the silence had felt like a weight he could never set down. It was not silent now. Children ran through the yard, chasing each other around the old oak tree. Their laughter rose up like birdsong. Some of them belonged to families who had come to the ranch with nowhere else to go. Elias had taken them in, one by one, the way he had once taken in a tiny baby beside a storm, a widow and her 3 little ones, a young Apache man who had lost his family, a pair of brothers whose father had gone to the war and never come home. They called it Crow's Rest now, a place for the lost to find their footing again. Samuel Hayes sat on the porch steps, older and grayer, whittling a small horse from a piece of pine for one of the children. Running Elk sat beside Elias in a chair of his own, his long hair gone white as winter frost. The 2 old men did not need to speak. They had learned, across all these years, that some friendships live best in the quiet. "You built something good here, Elias," Running Elk said at last, his voice low and steady. "I told you all those years ago, the bravest battle you would ever fight would not be with a rifle." Elias smiled. The lines around his eyes were deep now, but they were kind lines, the kind carved by laughter and love. "I did not build it," he said. "She did." As if his words had called her, the sound of hoofbeats came down the road. Elias sat up. There, riding through the golden light, was Rose. She had grown into a woman of grace and strength, 40 and full of life, her dark eyes bright as ever. She wore a traveling dress, dusty from the road, and her smile could be seen from clear across the yard. The children saw her first. Miss Rose is home." They swarmed toward her like bees to a flower. She swung down from her horse and gathered them up in her arms, laughing, kissing the tops of their heads, calling each one by name. Another year of teaching had ended. Another year of children who now knew how to read, how to figure sums, how to hold their heads high. Rose had become the most beloved teacher in all the territory. Folks sent their children to her from towns 3 days' ride away. But her heart still lived on this land. It always had. She made her way up the porch steps, and Elias rose to meet her. Slower now, his knees stiff with the years. She wrapped her arms around him and held him tight, and for a long moment, neither of them let go. "Papa," she whispered. "You came home," he said. "I always come home." They sat together as the sun sank lower, the children settling at their feet, the old friends nearby. Rose held her father's weathered hand in hers, and she looked out at all of it, the ranch, the people, the life he had made from nothing but grief and a single, stubborn choice. "Papa," she said softly, "I have been thinking. On the long ride home, I had time to think." Elias turned to look at her. "For a long time, folks used to call you the man who found me on the road." Her voice trembled just a little. "But that was never the whole of it. Anyone might have found me that night. Anyone might have ridden past." She squeezed his hand. "You did not just find me, Papa. You chose me. Every single day you chose me. When it was hard, when the town turned its back, when you had every reason to be afraid. You woke up each morning and you chose me all over again." Elias felt his throat go tight. That is what a father is, Rose said. Not blood, not a name. A father is the one who stays, the one who chooses. And you chose me my whole life long. And there, on that golden porch, surrounded by all the love he had built, the old warrior who had carried his grief for so many years finally let it go. His shoulders eased, his eyes filled, a single tear traced down his weathered cheek, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, Elias Crow was at peace. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.